the Baal Shem Tov and the Baal Shem Tov on Pirkei Avot. As we know, Pirkei Avot literally means chapters of the Father. Pirkei chapters, Avot, Father. And basically, what we're going to do in this, small little session, class, conversation, whatever, is to go. We're going through the first Mishnah, the first chapter, and the first chapter is all about the first Mishnah, which goes through the chronological how the Torah was delivered, right? And then in the first year, we talked about the relevancy of the oral Torah, and when the Torah says in Leviticus, I think it's 26:4. It says in Leviticus, it talks about Hukim, it talks about Mishpatim, and then it says Torah to, right? And so we learn now when the Torah says Torah to, it's speaking in plural, right? And what's going on is that there were two Torahs. There was the oral Torah and there was the written Torah. And so the first Mishnah talks about this. It talks about Moses received the Torah on Mount Sinai and handed it down to Joshua. So just what we're going to do is we're going to bring, before we go into what Baal Shem Tov says, because what Baal Shem Tov says is it's a huge treat, right? I mean, what he says is unbelievable. And it's like, when you read the Mishnah, it's like, you're like, okay, fine, you're like, whatever, fine, it's very nice. But where the Baal Shem Tov takes is amazing. But I believe in this idea of going into the practical, just to get the grassroots of what's going on before you blast off, right? So like we're learning the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah, we learned it last year. Moses received the Torah at Har Sinai, and we learned about Har Sinai, and we learned about Moshe and why he was the perfect person, and why Har Sinai teaches us all these lessons. We learned that, and now we're moving to the next phrase, which is it handed it down to Joshua, right? And so before we talk about Joshua and the greatness of Joshua, we just want to, for a second, we want to talk about who was Joshua. Joshua was the student of Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says that our sages teach us in Masechta Truma 16a. And remember, we're learning Rabbi Bergman's Rosh Hashiva out in Bnei Brak. We're learning his gateways to the Talmud, and he goes through the whole lineage of how everything was created and built and whatnot. And so Rabbi Bergman brings a statement from our Gemara in Truma 16a, and he says our sages teach us that when Moshe was about to depart to paradise, to the unseen reality, when Moshe was about to transcend, right? The Masechta Truma tells us he said to Yeshua, "Ask me to explain." These are real words, Moshe to Yeshua. I mean, it's easy just to read it, and we read all these books every day, and this whole thing. Okay, very nice. But the reality is to be able to read Moshe's words, a person who had direct contact with Hashem, face to face, direct contact with the infinite, the infinite of infinite realities, the echad, that everything in the universe goes back to this one source, and this one source is Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Rabbosha Shalom, and everything goes back to that source. Yeah, Moshe Rabbeinu had direct communication with that source. It's like a humongous concept. So it's like this. So Moshe says, the Masechta Truma tells us that when Moshe was about to depart to paradise, he said to Yeshua, "Ask me to explain all uncertainties you have in the matters of halakha." Basically, whatever, is there anything you're missing? Because I'm about to depart from this world, I'm about to transition. Is there anything you need to know? Is there anything I need to make clear to you? This is at the end of his life. These are the last words, the last sentences that are going to come out of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. It's a very emotional time, very emotional moment. And he replies, "My teacher," speaking of Moshe Rabbeinu, you should have speaking of Moshe Rabbeinu, "My teacher, I have never left you for an hour." So he's basically saying, I have no uncertainties, right? And in fact, that's Rabbeinu Gershom. He writes down, he's basically saying that he had no uncertainties. He was completely clear on the entire Torah, in and out, everything. He said, "I never left you. I was with you the whole time." So that's a very emotional thing to start everything out with. And just two other points before we go into the Baal Shem Tov, which is like a total rocket booster. When we talk about Yeshua, it's important to know that Yeshua instituted the second blessing in Birkat Hamazon. As we know, the first blessing of Birkat Hamazon is from Moshe Rabbeinu, the second bracha from Yeshua, the third bracha is from David HaMelech, and the fourth bracha is Chazal. And there's different reasons why, all of them, but we're not going to go into that right now. But the point is, he brought that. And he also, at the end of davening, we do this famous prayer, Aleinu LaShabeach, right? Depending, what's going on. But Aleinu, everyone knows Aleinu. Aleinu was also written by by Yeshua, and then also the rules that the Israelites followed in Israel in terms of how they dealt with land and the division of land and what the rules or whatever. They call it the 10 enactments. When the land was divided amongst the tribes, like Yeshua brought that whole concept into existence. So anyway, so that's that, right? So we got a little bit of background on Yeshua, and get ready to blast off because this Baal Shem Tov is like unbelievable. It's like completely unbelievable. So it's going off of. Oh wow, I'm not even there. Hold on. So again, this is the first chapter. I'm still in the first chapter and I'm at the section that starts with Yeshua, Siddiqim, and disciplines. Whoa, right? So this is where we're at. So this is interesting. I'm going to have to read a little bit inside because it's very complex. But we're going to do it together, right? This is the key thing. This is the Baal Shem Tov going. So we learned about what Baal Shem Tov said about Moshe Rabbeinu, right, in the first Mishnah. We learned that in the last year. This time we're going off of and he handed it down to Yeshua. First of all, why does the Mishnah say he handed it down? Why can't he say he gave it to him? He handed it down. So that's a concept in itself. But we're not going to go into that. Okay. So he says, there's a principle, right? You got to remember, this is the Baal Shem Tov, this is his direct teachings, right? This is direct teachings. The Baal Shem Tov says like this. He said, there's an idea that is necessary to travel, or a principle. He says, name an idea. He says, there's a principle that a person is necessary for a person to travel to meet a great man, meet the great man of his generation. So they say, the Baal Shem Tov saying you have a responsibility to go and seek out a teacher, to seek out a person of good moral, ethical quality, not just about how much Torah they know, but who they are as a person, what do they do, who are they? You have a responsibility to go out and seek that person. And he says, it's not enough to learn volumes upon volumes of ethical teachings that are found explicitly in the Torah. The Lord said to Moshe, right? So he's saying it's not enough. He's saying, first of all, he's saying you need to go out and you need to meet with somebody. You need to seek out the righteous person of your generation, the person who has the most wisdom, and the person who has the most character. You have a responsibility to go out and seek that person. And then he comes back and he says, and he brings his Torah. He brings his Torah to support this. He says, he said, the Lord said to Moshe, write this for remembrance in the book and convey it to the ears of Yeshua. Even though the Almighty told Moshe to write it in a scarce book, which is the Torah, and you think about it, how many prophets or people who came with revelations, how many of them physically wrote down what they brought into this world? Everyone had scribes. Everybody had scribes, and everybody was communicating with angels. Moshe Rabbeinu communicated directly with Hashem, and he wrote it down. No intermediary, straight source. And so he says, for the most humble person in a generation. So he says, even though the Almighty told him to write in his book, it was apparent, and apparently this would have been enough, right? Moshe wrote it down in the book. What's the big deal? He wrote it down in the book. What's going on? He said, but yet he told him, and he said, to convey it in the ears of Yeshua. He said, convey it to the ears of Yeshua. So the Baal Shem Tov was perplexed. Why is Hashem saying this? He's saying that to go and tell. He says to go and convey it and put it to the ears of Yeshua. And Baal Shem Tov was saying, wait, wouldn't it have been enough? Dayenu. Wouldn't it have been enough just to write it down in the book? He already wrote it down in the book. Why does it have to go and convey it into the ears of Yeshua? What's going on? God, I can't understand this. This is complex. Shem. Okay, so it says like this: even though the Almighty, you got to be frustrated sometimes with Hashem. You say, Hashem, I don't understand this. You got to say it. It's okay. So it's like this, right? It says, even though the Almighty told Moses to write it down, it's apparent. Apparently it wasn't enough. He had to tell him in his ears. He says, by the words of the mouth, direct speech. Right? This is what he told him to do. He said to go and say it in direct speech to him. It wasn't enough that he just wrote it in a book. For the main thing is what we hear from the Tzaddik of the generation. He said, because the main thing is what you hear from the Tzaddik of the generation. It's very good to learn Libo Torah. It's very good to steig. It's good to learn things Baal Peh. It's very good. But he says you have to go and seek out the righteous, the Tzaddikim of your generation, and you have to hear it from their mouths directly. And he says, this is the main thing. And he says, and of course, Moshe was the great man of piety in that generation. All right, so this is where he heats up. This is where it's about to blast off. And I know, no matter how much Torah you learn, you've not heard this explanation, period. So we're going to do it like this. So it says he brings a midrash. The Baal Shem Tov brings a midrash. You got to realize, Baal Shem Tov was like 300 years ago. It wasn't that long. In the midrash, in Devarim Rabbah, it brings a parable. It brings it in a couple other places. It brings in the goddess Brachis, in Shlomoth Rabbah, okay, different places. He said, so you bring this parable, and I'm telling you, this is about the. When I read this, I was like, oh my god, I gotta give this over right now because this is how amazing it is. And may we like retain this information, and we can understand when the Siddiqim tell us to do things that is much more underneath it than we could ever imagine. He says, so this midrash brings a parable, and it says like this: a king once gave his son 2 crowns. You hear this? A king once gave his son 2 crowns. Over a long period of time, he lost 1 crown. The king said to him, my son, be very careful that you guard the crown you have left. Since you have gone and lost 1 crown. He said, this is the same with the Israelites. They were originally given 2 crowns, given them in reward for their double response when they accepted the Torah. And it brings Exodus 24. What does Exodus 24 say? Let's find it. We're going to see it inside. And everybody should know this one by heart. But it says like this. It says, Kol asher daver Adonai na'aseh v'nishma. What does that mean? He says, all the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will hear. This is what the Jewish people said on Har Sinai. They said this on Har Sinai, and because they said this, they were given 2 crowns. You understand? They were given 2 crowns. We're following? Okay, they were given 2 crowns. And he says, since they had now done something in violation of the Torah, they violated something in the Torah in making the golden calf, the egel. They created the egel. Only the crown for Venishma, we will hear. Yeah? Yes, the crown, the crown, Venishma. That part, the only crown for we will hear remained. So there was 2 crowns given. When the Jewish people says we will do, they were given a crown, and then they said, well, we will hear it. Ba'anei Venishma, right? They were given that, right? That's what they were given. And so when they built the egel, they lost the first crown, meaning that they lost the crown of we will do. And all they have now, we will hear, right? And he says, this is the only crown. He said, this is why the blessed Lord admonishes the Israelites. And now, he says this in Devarim. He says, and now Israel hear. That's what he's saying. When the Torah says, and now Israel hear in Devarim, meaning in any event, at least guard the second crown that you still have. And this is why the term here is used specifically. In consequence, when the Israelites study from the scarce Torah, it is in the nature of obeying our promise we will do. And so it does not have as much power to inspire him because the crown for we will do was lost to the Israelite people. But when a person listens to a great tzaddik, and that is in the nature of we will hear, and for this the people still have a crown. Hence, everyone must travel to a great pious man in the generation to become attached to him. So wait, did you just hear that? It was a huge concept. It's a huge concept. So he says the Torah says that the Torah makes a point to say that Yeshua. He says and convey. He says God says this to Moshe. He says he says he says convey it to the ears of Yeshua. So why is Baal Shem Tov is perplexed? Why does it say convey to the ears of Yeshua? Like what's going on, right? Why? What's the point of that? Because Moshe writing down the Torah itself, it should have been enough, right? It already was enough. He wrote down the Torah; it's there. He has it. He could read it. Why was it important for him to say it to Yeshua, to put it into his ears? He said because the Baal Shem Tov says he brings a parallel it's in the Midrashim. It's in Midrashim Devarim Rabbah, and it's a parable that talks about a king that gave his son two crowns, and his son traveled and went different places, and his son lost one of the crowns, right? So he only had one crown, and so his father said, "You need to take care of that one crown in order to remain king." So in the same way, the Jewish people, when they stood on Har Sinai and they said, "Va'anei Manishma," when they say that. When they said that when they said that we will do and we hear, when they said that, they got two crowns, right? And then so what happened is that when they built the golden calf, they lost the first crown, which is we will do, right? And the only crown left was we will hear. So because of that, when a person studies Torah, that's following the crown of we will do. So it has a certain level of power because it was said by Hashem, but the ultimate power is we will hear. And so from that standpoint, the Torah says that you have to go and seek out a righteous person. You have to go and learn directly from a tzaddik, because the crown of we will hear is the crown where all the koach is at. And that's the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu was told to tell Yeshua the Torah in his ear, even though he already wrote it down. Because the koach of writing it down was keeping the commandment of we will do. So anyway, so this is the point. The point is like this. It's to say that when you think about anyone who's achieved anything great in life, a lot of it came from them learning from the people around them. And they said the people that you have around you determine who you are. If you want to see who you're going to be in 5 years, you just look at the people you have around you. And you can tell yourself where you're going to be in 5 years, in 10 years. And so the point is like this. So when the Shem tells us to go and seek out Tzaddikim, it may not just be just a person who knows a lot of Torah. You have great mitos. It could be a person who knows Torah but also does business. There's a person who knows a lot of Torah and has a family. There's a person who, knows a lot of Torah and has been through life experiences that I have and I can relate to. And so by connecting ourselves to these people and learning from their experiences and learning from their words empowers us to become who we're ultimately supposed to become. And so the idea is to say this, to remember that the Jews were given two crowns on Har Sinai when they said we will do and we will hear. And one of those crowns was lost when we built the Egel, and that was the crown of we will do. So the ultimate crown is we will hear. And so when we go and we hear the Torah and we learn directly from a tzaddik, is a much higher level than just reading books by himself. And that's the difference. You see people, they learn on their own. People learning, on the internet. They have Chabad.com. They have so many great websites, and it's very important. But it wasn't for me personally until I came to Eretz Israel and I came and learned from Tzaddikim, and I hear their words and I hear their lives, and I learned from that is just that the Torah really, I felt my uniqueness within the Torah started to blossom out. And so my suggestion for everybody is to find some people in their community, or at best come to Eretz Israel, because there's the Gedolim like literally walking all over the streets all the time, Tzaddikim, and from that place you will be fulfilling the crown that's on your head, which is